All that this morning is the co-founder of the Senate Tea Party caucus, Rand Paul of Kentucky. He also has a new book out called The Tea Party Goes to Washington. Thanks for coming in.
Good to be with you,
this morning,
George.
Senator. You know, the Tea Party has inspired a lot of these budget battles in states and these efforts to restrict the collective bargaining rights of public employees unions. But there's a new poll out in USA Today this morning showing that by a 2-to-1 margin, Americans favor keeping those collective bargaining rights. And we've seen these protesters all across the Midwest. Do you think you might have sparked a backlash here?
Yeah. Well, I think the interesting thing is that I don't think the Tea Party started this. I think circumstances did. You know, the circumstances are that we're in a recession. There's less money coming into state treasuries, less money coming into Washington. So I don't think we started the battle, but we're the ones pointing it out. Yeah, we're pointing out that we've got a real debt crisis, and I think it gets worse before it gets better because there really is a problem. States don't have the money to spend things the way they used to.
But I think a lot of people look at this and say, okay, and especially in Wisconsin, we've seen the public employees say, wait, we'll pay more for our health care and pensions, but you can't take away our rights. Have the governors here gone too far?
Well, I think ultimately Governor Walker had a good point. He said when the president decided to get involved in his state, he said, you know what, when you take care of your budgetary problems, you can come to Wisconsin and tell me about mine. And even though I might be an ally, he's a Republican governor, I'm not here to say I know about Wisconsin's problem or I'm going to tell him how to run his budget or what he needs to do. But I do understand the problem. And people also have to recognize that, you know, the teachers that are leaving their schools and disobeying, they should be there teaching, are making $89,000 a year. Their benefits greatly exceed the private sector. So really, it's not that we should be saying, oh, these poor teachers are not being paid. They're being paid very well, and I would expect them to be teaching my kids and not protesting in the Capitol.
Let's talk about something you do have responsibility for. That's the federal budget. Funding for the government operating funds run out next Friday, March 4th. The Democratic leader in the Senate has now proposed, Harry Reid, extending the current funding levels for another month so the negotiations can continue. I know that's not acceptable to you, but how much of a cut are you going to demand in order to keep the government running after March 4th?
I think what's important and what the Tea Party is all about is that if we do what the president says, if we freeze things at 2010 levels, we're going to add $13 trillion to the debt over 10 years. If we do what the Republicans want and we cut $100 billion, we're going to add $11 trillion in debt. Neither plan is sustainable. So what I'm about and what the Tea Party is about is keeping both Republicans and Democrats honest on this. You have to cut enormous amounts. You have to do much more than anybody has proposed, but the alternative is that we'll bankrupt the country.
So unless they go further, even for a temporary extension, you're going to vote against it?
Yeah, you have to do much more. We're not even close. See, what they're talking about, George, is they're talking about freezing this much of the budget, non-military discretionary spending. They're not looking at military, which they will have to look at military spending if they're serious about the budget, and they have to look at entitlements. In the next week or two, I'm going to present a plan to reform Social Security where it will be solvent in perpetuity. But the way you do that is you will have to link the age of eligibility to longevity. Which
so
means
that
basically
means raising the retirement
you will
age.
have to gradually do that. That's the only way you fix the entitlement programs.
And will you be willing to hold your own state to these standards? You know, in the Daily Beast yesterday, Paul Begala pointed out that Kentucky gets about far more from the federal government than they give out. They get $1.51 from Washington for every dollar in federal taxes paid. In your time as senator, are you committed to bringing that ratio down?
Well, the thing is if we could spend ourselves into prosperity, if spending more money in each state were somehow making us richer, think how much better we would be. We've been getting more money in Kentucky for years and years, but we still have a poverty problem. Think of Washington, D.C. We spend $20,000 per student on education there, and yet still the education system in Washington, D.C.
So you'll bring that number down?
I'll bring all the numbers down. It has to. I don't have a choice. We don't have a choice as a country. The alternative is we destroy our currency paying for a massive debt. You can either tax people, or you can borrow, or you can print the money to pay for the debt. But we're at a point where as we accelerate the printing of money to pay for the debt, you could destroy your currency. It's happened in other countries.
In the book, you also write about what you call a conservative foreign policy, and you have some tough words for your own party. You say Republicans treat war like Democrats treat welfare. I know you want to restrict defense spending and foreign aid, but what guidance do your principles provide in a situation like what we're seeing now in Libya, when you've got Gaddafi unleashing a massacre of his own people. Would you go in and try to, for example, set up a no-fly zone so he couldn't do that with his war plans?
I think when we go to war, as Americans, we should go to war reluctantly. It should be the most important vote that we ever make, and that we should never do it just on the spur of the moment. We should have a grand debate. And if I vote to go to war, it'll be because I think my children should go to that war.
So you wouldn't act now?
Well, I think you have to be very, very deliberative in this, in the sense that it's a very important vote. And I think too often we've gone to war without thinking ahead. And I won't vote to go to war unless I would send my kids there or I would go myself. There are always wars around the world, and we have to be careful for financial reasons, but also because when you send young people into war, you shouldn't do it without really careful thought.
Okay, Rand Paul, thanks very much. The book is called The Tea Party Goes to Washington.
Thank you, George.
Juju?
Well,